we've had repeated cycles of violence every time we have elections. And as an organization, and many other organizations that deal with issues of violence will also testify, we even have repeat survivors, okay? And even in a situation where we have a case ongoing in court, the fact that it has taken so many years means that we are likely to go into the next election without having any particular precedent set by the courts against gender-based violence. And especially because most of the survivors that we deal with reported that these incidences were they were violated by persons who were in armed, in uniformed officers.
Wairimu will start by just, painting a picture of how, of gender-based violence in Kenya as it is right now.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. I'd like to start from where we have come from as a country. So if you look at the last 10, 15 years, there's been quite some good development when it comes to the development of a legal framework and policies aimed at addressing gender-based violence in the country. So when you look at how we have performed as a country, and especially in comparison with many other countries in Africa, we have done rather well. Now, we also acknowledge that unlike before, when there was a culture of silence, and which also informed the reasons why COVAW was formed, because issues of domestic violence for very many years were considered private. And therefore, when they happened, people were expected to address them within family settings, where there was often a lot of compromise and a lot of denial of justice for the survivor or for the victim. Moving forward, you find that in terms of reporting on cases of gender-based violence, that again has improved a lot. Hardly a day goes without seeing cases of GBV reported in the papers, both print, TV, radio. And that's a good thing as well. Conversations as well in the communities.
Does that mean, there's an increase in cases, or does it mean that people are now able to report because of the awareness that has been created over time?
The cases are definitely high, but the level of awareness that enables people to report when incidences happen has also gone up. So there's a case of, increased reporting. What is unfortunate is that even with a supportive policy and legal framework, the implementation of the same remains very weak. It is not a deterrent, unfortunately, for gender-based violence in this country. And the reason for that is because even when survivors make the step of reporting their incidences, the support system in terms of how the police handle the cases, how the evidence is gathered in preparation for court, if they're lucky enough to get that far, leaves a lot to be desired. So on average, for example, you'll find that cases of gender-based violence take about 3-4 years to be resolved, even when the evidence is often present. The cases of sexual violence become a bit complicated because of the kind of evidence that is required. But even then, we have facilities that should enable this to be handled in a manner that doesn't compromise the quality. And yet you find that even in instances where all that has been taken care of, when this evidence is presented before a court of law, hardly do we get justice for the survivor.
You talk about the legal framework and the awareness that has enabled, survivors or people who have gone through gender-based violence to report. What we see in our newspapers, in our TV, paints a picture to the extent that gender-based violence has taken a turn to the worst in terms of, you see cases of killings, especially what we are calling femicide. You have an example of the post-election violence cases in Kisumu, Huruma, and all this. How do you describe that in the context where we have a legal framework where we are saying that in Kenya, compared to other countries, we have made progress, yet we still see these very disturbing trends.
So I'd like to say that one of the misperceptions there has been is that once we have the laws and policies in place, those would sort out the problem. But remember, gender-based violence is a social issue. So how are we socializing our children, for example, to understand that violence is wrong? What examples as parents and as guardians in the community are we giving to the youth? Okay? Because people tend to replicate what they tend to think is okay. Or people tend to do things that they think they can get away with. People tend to do things and often, let out or vent out their emotions in the manner in which they do, either in a violent manner or a non-violent manner, depending on how they have been socialized. Okay? So even before we get to our courts and our policies and our laws, there is a big vacuum in the family setup and in the community setup. Because one, the conversations, open conversations around violence are not happening. We don't have situations where many people are willing to tell their children or their sons that rape is wrong and unacceptable. I don't know how many fathers have had these conversations. Well, I guess there's also the cultural aspects around sexual conversations that were considered taboo, especially when happening across different age sets, okay? But I think with the issues that we are seeing today, we need to be very open in the way we communicate, but also we need to ask ourselves, what are we teaching our children, even in schools? I think very many people go through the school system in this country without knowing what GBV stands for, gender-based violence. And they only get to understand what it is when they start to read about it in the papers, having gone through, the entire education system without encountering issues of violence. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we teaching, even in our schools? Because that leaves a lot of impressions on us. And when we get out of school, our mindset, our perceptions have been partially formed. So we also need to, interrogate more broadly than just the policies and the laws that we have in place.
Yeah, I want us to stick there a bit. Beyond, what we teach our children. Obviously, there are cases, there are survivors. When you look at how we have dealt with, the cases of rape, and I will give examples of, especially during our elections, we have this, it spikes up. When you look at how we have dealt with it, what is your comment? Have we really been able to support people who have gone through gender-based violence, be able to deal with the trauma, access treatment and psychosocial support? When you work in the field, what do you see?
It's an unfortunate scenario that we're dealing with, Ruth, currently, especially when it comes to cases of post-election violence. We've had repeated cycles of violence every time we have elections. And as an organization, and many other organizations that deal with issues of violence will also testify, we even have repeat survivors, okay? And even in a situation where we have a case ongoing in court, the fact that it has taken so many years means that we are likely to go into the next election without having any particular precedent set by the courts against gender-based violence. And especially because most of the survivors that we deal with reported that these incidences were violated by by persons who were in armed, in uniformed officers. Most of the survivors will testify that what happened to them, they were violated by, people who were dressed in police uniform. So when you go to court, you have survivors, but then because it's difficult for them to identify exactly who these were, you don't have perpetrators. So are we saying that as a country, for as long as there is no perpetrator in court, that a survivor of GBV or a survivor of sexual violation will never get justice. You understand? And
is it a case of lack of evidence, or what is it? What really is the reason for that?
I wouldn't want to say much because the case is in court.
I see.
But I think there needs to be some.
But overall,
there needs to be some goodwill, even in terms of leadership, and leadership at different levels. Okay, because people get violated during a time when they want to exercise their right over who should be their leader. So I would expect that the leaders that have been elected or nominated into those positions during that particular period would be interested that such occurrences do not reoccur again, and that the survivors access some form of justice. To be very honest, I haven't seen a consolidated effort from the leaders to address this particular issue. And with a few years left to the next election, I am concerned, I'm worried about what will happen.
So what's the missing link?
I think goodwill and the political will. How do we train our uniformed forces? Do they understand their responsibility out there? Do they understand how to behave when they are out there? Do they understand that they cannot exercise their power by violating civilians? Because that is also the other issue. Normally, when it comes to issues of gender-based violence, it's about one person, the perpetrator, trying to assert their power wrongly over the survivor, over the victim. Okay? So how do we also socialize the society to deal with issues of power without wronging or hurting someone else? Do we have outlets where people can vent out their frustrations without venting them out wrongly on other people? And when these things happen and there is evidence that as a member of the uniformed forces, you are guilty, and beyond even the post-election violence, increasingly, we are seeing cases where, minors, for whatever reasons, held in police stations are reporting being violated. Maybe this particular minor was lost, or for whatever reasons, and I'm not saying it is right, their guardians took them there, they say for disciplining, and that's a whole conversation. But when they are in there, what we consider to be a safe space, a police station, then we have read cases of police officers who have come for those girls in the night, violated them, and then put them back in the cells, or even violated them in the cells. What happens to those police officers? What action is taken? Because action needs to be taken, because that is rape. They need to be charged accordingly. The law does not discriminate, against a civilian and the police.
So are you saying in a lot of cases they are not charged? They are...
At least I haven't seen that. We haven't seen that. Because, we should know. We have a right to know that this particular incident was reported and this action is being taken. We haven't seen that. Yes.
So is it a case of impunity that has pervaded our society?
Impunity, the lack of goodwill, and also the fact that unfortunately after many years people tend to view issues of gender-based violence as a woman's issue. Okay? And we are still dealing with issues of inequality and perceptions that women and girls continue to be secondary citizens, even when our constitution and other tools, instruments of, law that we have say otherwise, okay? Now, the moment that happens, and also the inability to connect and to understand that violence in a country has implications on its development process. People don't understand that. So that even if it is in the workplace and there is violence going on in the workplace, the productivity of that particular person is hugely affected. The ability of a minor or a woman that has been defiled, or even a man, because we also deal with cases of men that have been defiled, to recover enough for them to realize their full potential takes very long because of the psychosocial impact that the abuse has on them. And so for as long as we continue to separate those issues, for as long as we are unable to understand the impact of violence on the broader picture of this country and its desired development goals, we shall continue to accord very little attention.
I'd like to follow up on that. Issue of impact. And I'm sticking a bit with the issue of post-election. I know you have worked quite a bit with the survivors of post-election violence. What have you seen as the impact of the sexual violence especially in those areas that were mainly affected? What is the impact?
At individual level, like I said earlier, there is a psychosocial impact that the survivors have to deal with, okay? Trauma, stress, anger. At community level, there is an issue of mistrust. How could a leadership, how could our government allow this to happen to us? And to add salt to injury, not do or not seem to be doing anything about it. So, those are the two key observations that we have seen.
Also, at an individual level, I think we've had cases where you talk about, especially women who have been raped, being excommunicated from their communities. And also the issue of, children left out of rape, born out of rape, and then some being infected with diseases like HIV and other, sexually transmitted diseases. Is that the case that you also see?
Yes, and that's why I'm saying that for as long as we continue to look at this issue of GBV in a linear manner, yes, we will not comprehend the full impact of it. Yeah. So that we have instances where we have survivors that have been violated repeatedly. Every cycle, they've been unfortunate. Mm-hmm. It's been unfortunate that they have been violated every cycle of elections that we have. And it gets to a point where some of the other people in the community tend to blame them. Should shift the blame on them. How is it that you, every time there's an election, mbona ni wewe? Kwani ni wewe too? You understand? Are you the only one that seems to be a target? Okay? So then some of them probably then start to think, I was probably in the wrong place. I must have done something wrong to have attracted, the violation that happened to me. And then, of course, then there is the issue of the impact of, contracting HIV as a result of the act. Now, this particular person, in addition to the trauma of being violated, has to live, has to manage HIV, and then children born out of rape, they are innocent children. But the community will always remind them, and even some mothers reject those children because they are a reminder of the pain that they have gone through. So a rejected child is a damaged child. So even as they grow up damaged. And so, like I said, how will that child realize their full potential when they are already rejected by their mother? The cycle is vicious. The cycle is bad, and we need, as a country, to make a statement, to take a stand and make a statement against sexual violations during the elections, but generally. Yeah.
So on one hand, we've made a lot of progress in our legal system, the policy framework and all that, and the awareness. On the other hand, at the practical level, we still have perverse cases of gender-based violence. And so what must we do to be able to change this tide?
Just implement the law. Implement the policies as they should be. Do the police understand? First of all, does the community understand? Do I understand my rights as a citizen? Do I understand my responsibilities as a citizen? Because there's also a culture of silence. A violation is happening. You are a witness to a violation. But you don't want to get involved. You don't want to staki shida nyingi, so you choose to withhold information or even evidence as a witness that would help facilitate access to justice for a survivor. And then at the other levels, do the police understand their role? We've had gender desks established in many police stations in this country, but then they don't seem to have, entirely met the objectives for which they were set up for. And I don't think gender desks by themselves are the solution. I think the training of police officers from when they're being vetted and when they go into training before they're released out and posted to their respective stations should include the management of gender-based violence cases, and there should be continuous engagement with them, because they also, when you talk to them, they'll also tell you their frustrations. People come in and report cases, and then halfway, because they've been compromised, so there has been negotiations outside there, they withdraw the cases, okay? And then in the health facilities, where crucial medical evidence is supposed to be gathered and collected, again, the health system, we all know, is burdened in terms of the health workers that are available. So we have had instances and even cases where doctors that are supposed to come to court and testify fail to turn up repeatedly for hearings. And you can imagine the impact that does to a court, to a case. for example. In some instances, it's just carelessness in terms of the way, the evidence is gathered, in terms of the way the reporting is done. So really, we've done, like I said, a lot of work has been done. A lot of work has been done by both the government and, civil society organizations that are involved in this kind of work, but a lot more remains.
So tell me about COVAW. COVAW has done quite a bit of work in this area. So I want to hear a bit more about what you've done and what you have seen.
So under our Access to Justice program, we work with pro bono lawyers. And the reason why we use pro bono lawyers, Ruth, is because legal representation in this country is expensive. Okay, so what we do as an organization is that we reach out to lawyers out there who are interested in gender-based violence and are willing to dedicate some of their time to support such cases. So when a case is reported to us and we evaluate and it's, we want to run with it, then we reach out to our pro bono lawyers and they run with it and that's how we are able to continue to do what we do. Otherwise, it becomes difficult also even to run a legal department, because how many lawyers can you have as a non-governmental organization? So for that, we are grateful for the pro bono lawyers that work with us. Now, we also provide psychosocial support. And so we have identified psychologists in various parts of the country, and we are able to refer survivors to the psychologists, and the psychologists work with them. And it's not a one-off, it's, over a duration of time. For as long as they require psychosocial support and counseling, that support is available for them. That now is over and above what we do in terms of our trainings and awareness, including engaging officials in the judicial system, including working with the police. But most of our work lies, and we invest a lot in raising awareness and engaging communities. So we also have community champions and activists who, in the event that our projects have come to an end, there is sustainability in terms of the information that we share. Now, over the last few years, we have focused on addressing issues of violations against women and girls with intellectual challenges, because often they are taken advantage of, and there's a lot of silence. Generally around persons with disabilities, because some people believe that you can violate them and it is okay, without understanding that they have equal rights. These are human beings like the rest of us. They're living with a disability that doesn't compromise their rights as persons. Now, when it comes to persons with intellectual disabilities, their case is worse, because often most of them have difficulties communicating. And so perpetrators find them an easy target, because, often it's their word against theirs, if at all they ever speak up, or if at all it's ever realized that they were violated. And so currently, as we speak, majority of the cases that we have as COVAW are related to women and girls with intellectual challenges that have been violated. Yeah.
And what have you seen as a result of your interventions? Some of the results you can talk about, some of the lessons that we can pick from here to be able to address the issues of gender-based violence, and especially around persons with intellectual disabilities.
We've seen hope, okay? Because human beings want justice, okay? So when you engage with them and they can see that there is hope for justice, it triggers some joy and some confidence in them. Now it's been a mixed bag of results. In one sense, we have had some wins in court. In other instances, we have lost. In other instances, the cases continue to drag on, which is very frustrating for the survivors, their caregivers, their parents. But you know what? We soldier on. We soldier on because at the end of the day, if we allow what we consider to be challenges to get the better of us, then we will also be doing an injustice to the very many people out there that might not currently have any other avenue, but the avenue that organizations like COVAW provide for them to access justice.
This is my last question. When you look at the totality of everything, the picture you've just painted about the situation of gender-based violence in Kenya, the interventions that you have been able to undertake, how does the future look like for you, for women and girls in Kenya?
I'm optimistic. The future looks bright, but nothing good comes out of nothing. So we have to work and work a lot harder. We have SDGs to deliver on, okay? We also have our national development plans to deliver on. Counties have plans. Some of them have GBV plans, which is highly commendable. But we have to go beyond the plans to ensure that those are being implemented so that women who form the bulk of the population in this country can have a safe environment in which they can thrive and be productive. For as long as that is not, so as long as we are not committed towards realizing that, we shall always lag behind, even in terms of our development performance. If you look at countries that have made huge strides in terms of gender equality, it is because they have a comprehensive system that takes women along with them as equal citizens. And that means also taking care of issues of gender-based violence when they happen, okay? They have instilled confidence in the judicial system, for example, all right? They've also instilled confidence with their police force. In many of those countries, when you see a police officer, they are a friend, they are friendly. Unfortunately, in this country, we second guess, do I not engage?
Why?
Yeah, because that trust has not yet been fully cultivated. So if we can get those things in place, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we must try harder. I think we can try harder.
What do we need to get those things in place, for example? Are they resources?
Commitment.
Are they partnerships?
Commitment supported by resources and accountability. If you're responsible, I keep saying, if you're responsible as a police officer, if you're responsible as a social worker, if you're responsible as a parent, if you're responsible as a citizen, as a judicial official, are you doing your bit? Are you doing your bit? And is someone holding you to account for that?
Somebody has said that the reason why women issues always lag behind in any setup is because they are never politicized enough to get to the level where the policymakers, the decision makers think it's really a big issue. What is your view of that?
Corruption is pretty political in this country, and nothing has been done about it. So I disagree, okay? Because for me, when we start saying, oh, it's because the issue has not been politicized enough, I think it's an excuse. We don't need to qualify action against gender-based violence. It is a human rights violation. We simply need to deal with it, without qualifying it.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
And all the best.
Thank you very much.